Okay. All right, hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Verse by Verse. Grab your Bibles and follow along as we continue in our verse by verse, chapter by chapter, and book by book study through the entire Bible. We are currently in Luke chapter 21, and I will spend just a little time on, since it's a prophetic chapter, I'm going to spend just a little time on it, not as much time as I did when we went through Matthew 24. If you want a more in-depth study, then go back and, like I say, on Facebook or even my YouTube channel, The Bible Perspective, BP, The Bible Perspective. And I'm gonna just cover just a little. Now, as I was thinking about it, and I wasn't going to cover a lot of it at all, but I said, well, there's so much that I hear that I think that it would be sort of just not possible for us not to do it. So I'm going to talk about some of this, and especially because to understand, let me get to this, show you where we left off. Let's see. Okay, so verse 20, I want to read verse 20. It says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that its desolation has come near. Then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. Those inside the city must leave, must leave it, and those who are in the country must not enter it, because these are the days of vengeance until to fulfill all things that are written. Oh, I'm making a mess here. To fulfill all things that are written. Woe to the pregnant women and nursing mothers in those days, for there will be great distress in the land and wrath against this people. I want to explain this. This is why I'm reading it. I'm going to explain this a little further because it'd be worth us to help this. Then it said, verse 24, then they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive into all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So what does all that mean? And I think this is why I'm going to take a little time just to do this. I am getting a little... Okay. There's a couple of things I didn't do when I should have done it. But anyway. So what does all of this means here? And I think that's important for us to understand. I think my live is being interrupted anyway. Alright guys, let's see here. Let's try this again. Okay. Alright, so I'm getting a lot of interruptions. Let me say this too. As I'm watching this on my iPad here, it seems like there's a lot of interruptions. I will say this, that it seems like the playback on Facebook later is better. So, all right, so I won't be let myself get distracted by that. All right, so what Jesus is talking about now, I said in order to understand Bible prophecy. In order to understand Bible prophecy, I'm just going to share two scriptures. I'm going to go, like I say, in depth as I wanted to, or probably what these subjects deserve. Like they deserve more of an in-depth, exhaustive treatment. The reason I say that is because prophecy in and of itself is very simple. Prophecy is simple. The Bible is simple. And man complicates the Bible. Man makes it harder with their own interpretations, and I'm going to say sometimes even misinterpretations, and not reading all of the text, not reading the text in context. Okay, but when you read it, it is simple. So sometimes people read text through a theological perspective, and that becomes a problematic. I'm going to pull some verses up here. Then I'm going to see that. I'm going to let us read some of these verses here. But I'm not going to. Let's see. So okay, let me show you this image here, and then we can get into it. Because remember, he makes this statement. Let me go back and read this statement here. In verse 24, they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive into all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And so the thing is, what does he mean by that? You know, what is meant by the time of the Gentiles, and also what is meant by, I mean, who is he talking to? Now, what's important here, remember, Luke is a Gentile. So now he's looking at this through a Gentile's perspective. Okay, he's looking at this through a Gentile perspective. I'm gonna get one more. All right. I'm bringing up some scriptures I'm going to put on our screen here, because I want us to see this. And again, this is not going to do us justice. However, this will be important enough for us to see. All right. So, let me bring this image up for us. So I said last time, as a Gentile, when you look at the timeline where Jesus is speaking, and if you're reading Bible prophecy, as I said, it's simple. It is exhaustive, but it is simple. Now, what that means is that, you know, there's a lot of it that you should make sure that you're covering. But we also need, but there's enough of it too that we can say, well, what is the essence of prophecy? All right, the essence of prophecy, and again, it's worth kind of going over here, centers around the nation of Israel. That's important, that it centers around the nation of Israel. So this is why he says this again, verse 20. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize its desolation has come near. Now, what was the desolation? Well, remember, Jesus talked about this desolation. He said, you will not see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Okay, that's the desolation that he's referring to. And all right, so oh. Again, I'm getting a lot of interruptions here. All right. So that's the desolation he is referring to. All right. I'm trying to bring up this image here so you can see this. All right. So let me explain this image here because I think this is important. I showed this before. Okay. Now, this is Daniel's prophetic dream. Okay. In fact, let me just do this before I really get into there. All right. Bear with me a minute because I'm going to do this all at once and then get it over with. Because I want to read the scriptures and I'm going to come back to that image right there. And it'll make sense once I bring it up. It's going to make sense. And like I say, prophecy will make sense. It's not difficult, but if we understand it, then all right. Now, so from a Jewish perspective, remember the Bible is speaking from a Jewish perspective, and it is speaking. And as Jesus is speaking here, now remember, Luke is writing to us, and he is writing to us from a Gentile perspective. And that's why I'm going to go over this again, because that image you saw, I'll get back to it in a moment. That image that you saw, where it's going to refer to this is the time of the Gentiles. That's why I'm going to take the time to go through this. So just kind of bear with me just one moment, because I want you to read these scriptures. And this is the kind of, I can say, this gives us enough information. It's not a full treatment of biblical prophecy itself, but it will give us enough of the keys to kind of understand this, what Jesus is referring to here. All right. So when you read Bible prophecy, and people, as I said before, they want to have a newspaper in one hand, they're trying to predict. Prophecy, or they're trying to interpret the signs of the time, and again, that is not okay. All right, so let me do this. All right. Okay. I want to read this. Now, Daniel's prophecies and these passages, this comes from Daniel chapter 2. This comes from Daniel chapter 2, and let's see how. All right, let me read. Well, let me tell you what's going on. I got to do a lot of narration here because again, I'm doing a kind of a cheat sheet thing here, and as I said before, prophecy is exhaustive right here. You got prophecies in Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and then of course the minor prophecy. But what they all have in common is this: they are centering on God's plan and purpose for Israel. So understand that. So Isaiah kind of begins with all except for the last 3 books of the Old Testament, or you should kind of group them around the time of Isaiah, because they are the beginning of the prophetic voice where God is saying judgment is coming. And sort of the pattern that you have is that God is going to judge Israel, but then he also says that he's going to judge the nations around Israel. And then he's going to judge like Assyria. He's going to judge Babylon. He's also some of these Egypt for their wickedness. So he is okay. So that's the prophetic voice. You also see God's prophecy of the restoration of Israel, and then you see God's future glories, his future plans of Israel. Okay. So up until the Babylonian invasion, up until that time, what you see is all of these, I say, nations, whether they're mighty or mighty nations, but they're not world dominating nations. And that's important. The Babylonian invasion changed not only the course of history, the course of mankind, the course of Israel. It changed all of this into a different setting. This is what you see with these prophecies in Daniel. So let me read. Daniel, again, let me back up again because, okay, so God had been prophesying in Isaiah, which started probably about some 80 years before the Babylonian Empire, maybe 180 to 120 years. And then Jeremiah comes on the scene around 20 years before the Babylonian Empire. He goes through that. So now what we're doing is in Daniel. Daniel is one of the first to be deported to Babylon. Of course, if you go back and you read Daniel, they're settling into their life. They're settling into life in Babylon. God gives Nebuchadnezzar a dream. Now, in this dream that God gives Nebuchadnezzar, this is the dream that he gives him. Now, I won't come back to that, but this is the dream that Nebuchadnezzar is given by God. And he doesn't understand it. And he calls Daniel. And this is what Daniel says. He tells him the dream. He says, now, this was the dream. Now we will tell the king the interpretation. Your Majesty, you are the King of kings. The God of heaven has given you sovereignty, power, strength, and glory. Whenever people live, or wild animals, or the birds of the air, he has handed them over to you and made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. Now keep this in mind. He's describing world dominating kingdoms. After you, there will rise another kingdom inferior to yours, and then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which will rule, now get this, the whole earth. A fourth kingdom will be as strong as iron, for iron crushes and shatters everything, and like iron, it smashes, it will crush and smash all the others. You saw the feet and toes, partly of the potter's fired clay, and partly iron. It will be a divided kingdom, though some of its strength will be in iron and will be in it. You saw iron mixed with clay. It's in here. You saw this iron mixed with clay. And then it says, verse 42, and that the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly fired clay. Part of the kingdom will be strong, part will be brittle. And you saw iron mixed with clay, and the peoples will mix with one another, but will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with fired clay. Now get this, in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, and this kingdom will not be left to another people. It will crush all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, but itself will endure forever. You saw a stone break off from the mountain without a hand touching it, and it crushed the iron, bronze, fired clay, silver, and gold. The great God has told the king what will happen in the future. The dream is true, and interpretation. So that's the dream. Now here is what he is kind of describing. This is the image. It may not be a perfect representation, but notice the point I want you to see there, it is a human image. And that's important. Notice the head of gold. And then the second was the breast of silver, the Mede and Persian kingdom. And then you see the thighs, which is the Grecian kingdom, which was held by Alexander the Great, and then the legs of Rome, and then the feet of clay. Now the feet of clay, by the way, those kingdoms had not yet risen up. What's important about this image to understand what it represents is man's time. See? And what God, the prophetic picture that God is giving, beginning at Daniel, was the picture of man's time, these world kingdoms. Now get this, and also the Gentiles. So remember this term, the times of the Gentiles. Okay, the times of the Gentiles. Jerusalem will be trampled over until the time of the Gentiles. This is what he's referring to, beginning as Daniel is speaking from Nebuchadnezzar's time. They have been trampled over. They have been under what? Rulership of Gentiles. So if you're speaking even from Luke's perspective, okay, from Luke's perspective, some 500 years before, okay, some 500 years before, all right. In fact, I like this image here because it gives us kind of some of the dates. So if you look at starting at the birth of Jesus and you go back, then this is when the Babylonian kingdom came to power, 605, excuse me, to 535, and then you see these dates here. But from this time, Jerusalem has been trampled, even as Jesus was speaking. They were under the foot of Rome. Okay? Now Jesus then goes on and he speaks, because think about this, Rome, remember, ruled from 167 AD and went all the way to 460 AD. Right? So some close to 600 years Rome was in power. Jerusalem, remember that the prophecy of Jerusalem fell in AD 70. Okay? AD 70. So when Jesus says here that they will, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, I'm going to get back to this in a moment, then recognize this desolation is near. Now, there's also what's called in prophecy a near and far fulfillment. The near fulfillment happened in AD 70. And then the ultimate is going to happen again in the end of the age, or we could say the end of the age, the very last of the end of the age. Now what's important again to remember is that this image here, which represents the man, the human, right, Gentile. So this is of course of note with Luke, who's a Gentile. So this is the time of the Gentiles right here. Right here. This is the times of the Gentiles. Now, when the Bible also speaks about preaching the gospel in all of the world, all right, so oftentimes people have mistaken that to mean that the gospel should be preached from a perspective of geography. I remember back in the 80s that, again, a lot of preachers thought that, especially with the advent of TV and satellite, that if they covered the globe, the geography of preaching the gospel, that Jesus would come back. I mean, and I'm not talking about not kooks, okay? Men of goodwill really thought that we were not survived the 80s. That Jesus was going to come back in the 80s. Now again, I'm saying that there's a lot of ways they misinterpret a lot of scriptures. One right here is that, first of all, this represents, okay, so when Jesus is speaking, by the way, remember, Jesus is speaking in the time of Rome. Okay? He's speaking in the time of Rome. The legs. That's where they are prophetically. Now, by the way, we are in the same kind of time period. I'll get back to that in a moment. So when Jesus says that the gospel will be preached in the world, now the world is in this context here, it's the entire rule of man. So all the way down to the feet, okay, all the way down to the feet, that is the time of man. So we have to look at it from a standpoint that as God is looking at, and this image I think becomes a very good kind of example, that as God is looking at it, he's not looking at it from a geography. Paul and them believed that they had covered the world in the gospel during his day. But look at it from the standpoint of the entirety of man's time, the age of man, the government and rule of man. But I want to look at something else here. Okay, I want to look at something else. And because we're talking about this time of the Gentiles. All right, so how did that play? Well, let's first understand. Let me read this verse of scripture here. All right, so this is in Daniel chapter 9. And it says, 70 weeks are decreed about your people in your holy city to bring a rebellion to an end, to put a stop to sin, to wipe away iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Now, remember, I kind of got into this last time, and as I was saying, I was kind of stumbling because I was trying to say it as quick as I can, and I couldn't. But anyway, this is a prophetic timetable. This is a prophetic image, okay, of the world's kingdom until the end of time. And you remember that what's going to destroy this image, which represents what? Man's time on earth, man's rulership on earth, right? What's going to destroy that will be a image, right? Will be an image. This image here would be an image made without hands, right? So an image made without hands. All right. So that's the image of the kingdoms of the world, the time of the Gentiles, from Babylonians' day until the end of the age. And Jesus is going to destroy that image, man's time. He's going to bring man's time to an end. This prophecy here is a timetable of that prophecy. Okay? So now he says 70 weeks are decreed, and this means 70 weeks were 70 sets of sevens, or 7-year periods of time, totaling 490 years. But I want you to pay attention to what he says. 70 weeks are decreed about your people, meaning the Jews. Daniel, the angel Gabriel is speaking to Daniel, and he says about your people, and then he says, and your holy city, meaning Jerusalem. So what is the decree about? To bring rebellion to an end, to put a stop to sin, to wipe away iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. That's what the 70 weeks, this time period that God is doing, that's what he's doing, right? Now verse 25, he says, know and understand this, from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah Prince. And again, this is a 490 year period of time. But we need to explain some things in here. Now watch this. Will be 62 weeks. Okay, will be 62 weeks. Now it will be rebuilt in the plaza and the moat. Oh, I'm sorry, I think I missed some. Let me go back here. Oh, all right, let me shrink this because you need to see this here. Okay. For maybe 62 weeks. It will be remote in the plaza. Okay, let's see. Now there's something I'm missing here. Oh, okay. Alright. Hold on, guys. I missed something here because this is important. This is the timetable here. I don't know how I missed this. No, in 62 weeks. Remote in difficult times. Oh. Oh, okay. No, I'm just misreading it. Alright, here we go. I misread it. Okay, notice. Verse 25 again. Know and understand this. From the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem to the Messiah the Prince would be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Now that's the number I wanted to focus on. I kept missing that. I don't know why I missed that. But that's the number I wanted to focus on. In other words, he noticed he said 7 and 62 weeks, which is 69 weeks. Now that's going to be very, very, very important. Then he says, it will be rebuilt with the plaza and moat, but in difficult time. Then he says after 62 weeks, now get this statement, the Messiah will be cut off, and we have nothing. The people of the coming prince will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end will come of the flood until the end, and there will be war and desolations are decreed. Now this prophecy right here, amazing in that he makes this prophecy about the Messiah being cut off after 69 weeks. Now remember I said if you are prophecy, we could say where are we in prophecy? Right? In every generation, you are able to locate yourself prophetically. Jeremiah was able to locate himself by reading the prophecies of Isaiah. Daniel, this whole discourse here, this revelation, this prophetic revelation came about because Daniel was reading the prophecies of Jeremiah, which said that the captivity of Jerusalem, they were put out of the land, would last for 70 years. And Daniel was doing the math. He was like, okay, 70 years. This 70 years is almost up. And he begins to pray and seek God. And when he prays, God is giving him, sends Gabriel to give him this prophetic revelation. So now he says, here is the prophetic time clock until Messiah. This timetable also corresponds with this image here. Okay? So, that's interesting. This prophetic image corresponds with this image, this particular image here. Okay? And so, he says, okay, so 490 years. Now, get this. This image right here should have lasted just over 7 years after Messiah was cut off. As we're reading in Luke chapter 21, remember that Jesus is just a couple of days from being arrested. Now you can understand now why the disciples were kind of confused. Now let's read something else here. So after 69 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off. Now, so you have all of these different kingdoms, right? Now, let me go back to something where verse 25. No one understands this from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. The Messiah, the Prince, will come. This happened as Daniel probably passed away. When Daniel in the 5th chapter of Daniel, you see Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom pass away from him. It passes from Israel in terms of their captivity. They go from being captive in the Babylonian kingdom until the Median Persian kingdom. In other words, this second kingdom right here, the Persian. During this Persian kingdom right here, Cyrus the king issues the order giving Jerusalem to be rebuilt. Now that, if you want to read more details about that, that's covered in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay, and also Esther, but Esther doesn't really deal with the rebuilding. But those are the three books that actually deal with that time frame. But Nehemiah and Ezra specifically, this is their journey back to Jerusalem to rebuild the city of Jerusalem, to set up a nation, a kingdom, things like that. Okay, that's what they were doing. So what that time also indicated was this prophetic clock started. So if you was reading in the Grecian times, you were able to look back and says, oh, guess what? Cyrus issued that decree. If you was in the Roman times, you were able to look back and go, man, look at the Grecian kingdom. And the prophecies about the Grecian kingdom has already come to pass. Now, Luke and them was right upon, the disciples were right upon what? The 69 week. They were able to locate themselves and say, oh, guess what? We are in the 69th week. Why? Because the Messiah is getting ready to get cut off. Right? The Messiah is going to get cut off. All right. Something else happens though. And let me bring in our last set of scriptures, and then I'll pick this up in the next verse. So verse 27, he says he will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and offerings. And the abomination of desolation will be on the wing of the temple until the decree destruction is poured on the desolator. Now, what does all that mean? What's important that I want to kind of focus on is this last week, this 70th week. Okay, the 70th week. That's this last 7-year period. And he refers to what we commonly known as the Antichrist, but he's really not the Antichrist. He's really not identified as the Antichrist. He is really the beast, the son of destruction, okay, the man of sin. But he will rule the world, and he will be this last world ruler. His will be, of course, a lot shorter. When we talk about, he will, again, and the Revelations chapter 13 really deals with his kingdom in itself. But that's what he's talking about. So that 7-year period, this man of sin, the beast, the Antichrist, will rule the earth. Now, he will make a covenant, and then in the middle of the covenant, so at 3.5 years, he breaks the covenant. All of this gives us now where we can locate ourselves. Right now, we are between Daniel's prophetic week of 69, or we can even say we're in week 69, I'm going to say we're between week 69. And we know that this 70th week hasn't started yet. And we need to be very careful. Why? Because I am one that I'm always careful about scriptures. I look at what exactly is it saying. So, for example, are we in week 50? No, we know we're not in week 50 because the Messiah wasn't cut off. How do we know we're in week 69? Well, we know that we are in week 69. Let's read it again. Verse 26, after those 62 weeks, Messiah will be cut off and will have nothing. Now think about that. That's how we know we are in week 69. Has the Messiah been cut off? Well, we know that for the last 2,000 years, Jesus, what? He was cut off, and now he is seated at the right hand of the Father until he makes his enemies his footstool. All right, so that's important. Since we know that the 69th week has begun because the Messiah was cut off, and we know that the 70th week has not yet come because this man hasn't risen up and he hasn't formed a covenant. So right now we are in between week 69 and week 70. What's holding up week 70 becomes the question. So I'll get into that next time. What is holding up week number 70? And that becomes very important. It goes back to the times of the Gentiles. But I'll get into that in our next study. All right, guys. I'll see you in the next study. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Till next time, I'll see you then. All right.